Bodog poll question of the playoffs lost already. Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres and Price on Twitter. Bodog, free casino games, poker tips, and the latest sports odds. Make a play at Bodog.net. Bodog line of the day for me. Lions in Winnipeg on Friday, where we expect Nathan Rourke to play against the Bombers. Winnipeg very likely to address a more representative lineup than what we saw a week ago Saturday at BC Place. They're trying to put on a show for the home fans, also a tune-up for the West Final, and they don't have a lot of tune-ups because they've clinched so early. So I'm going to lay the 4.5 points with Winnipeg on your Bodog line of the day. Here he is, our Canucks reporter, one half of the rink-wide duo with Andrew Wadden. They were back at it again with the post-game podcast last night. Mr. Jeff Paterson. How we doing, Jeff?
About the same as yesterday.
Yeah. It's just the Groundhog Day over and over again.
Answer me the poll. Are the playoffs already lost?
I want to come at this two different ways. I predicted that they would be right there pushing for a playoff spot deep into the season, and I get that it's 7 games, and Bruce Boudreau was going down the road of 4 points back last night and doing everything he can to remain positive. But my mathematical brain it sees things differently, even this early in the season, that they played at a 649 clip under Bruce Boudreau last year, going 32-15-10. That was 57 games. They have dug themselves this hole. They've got 75 games to go. They essentially are going to have to play at that same 649 clip over a 75-game haul. And we saw that last year wasn't enough ultimately. Like, they needed to be better to get into the playoffs, and here they are already digging themselves. It's a massive hole if it's not a grave. The math, to me, it doesn't add up for them, and it's such a sad state of affairs. Well documented, the mood in the city, the mood around town, the mood in the locker room, all that kind of stuff. But this is where we are. That after 7 games, I spent some of this morning looking up historical records of longest losing streaks and longest winless streaks. And guys, they're within striking distance, given the schedule that's at hand here, back-to-backs coming up, and then at home to New Jersey. This thing could get to 10 if they don't figure it out. And 10 is the longest losing streak. That's 0-8-2. So they did get a couple of points, as they've done already this season. But again, that's where we are. 7 games in and flipping through the history book, trying to figure out how close they are to the all-time franchise losing record.
Well, we know they set an NHL record for multi-goal leads blown off the start of a season ending in defeats. We had a stat last night that came out of TSN Sports Center. I think it was 4 other Canadian teams in NHL history have started the season with no wins in 7 games, including like an expansion-era Senators team, a 1930s era Montreal Canadiens team, and the Leafs 13 years ago, who were so terrible. We missed you yesterday, Jeff, but we were asking on our Bodog poll question yesterday, do they need to rebuild? Like, is the die cast here? Do you look at what we have seen yet again here off the start of a season and say, these guys blew it. They just need to blow it up and rebuild it. This team isn't going to be good enough.
I've been saying it for a decade, and I know I'm not alone in that regard, that they've missed the boat so many times that at some point here, maybe you do have to tear it down to the studs. But the problem there is that you're going to be giving away players. Like, just the cap commitments that they have made, and we saw Carolina was willing to take on Max Pacioretty and his bloated contract because Vegas couldn't afford it. And I think that they're going to be in that boat, and so they're not getting much of a return. Like, this idea of a rebuild and trade away your best players, sure, some of them have market value, but in this economy, with so many other teams cash-strapped or cap-strapped and cash-strapped, you're just limiting the playing field with which you can barter and make deals, and so you're not dealing from a position of strength at all. If they decided today in the corner offices at Rogers Arena that they wanted to tear it right down, I just don't, like, what does Brock Boeser get you at this stage with the 3-year contract and been injured? And, there'd be a lineup around the block to get Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes and probably Thatcher Demko too. But, are those the pieces that you want to retain? Like, where is your dividing line and who stays and ultimately who goes, or is everybody? Like, are there no untouchables at this point? It's mind-boggling to think of this group that performed so well in the playoff bubble, and I guess gave us all a false hope, because since then, it just feels like there's individual talents here, but there is clearly something wrong with this mix.
The two most vocal players, perhaps getting the most the most intense spotlight right now from fans and media, and JT Miller and Bo Horvat. 2 goals for JT Miller last night. You walk into that room, though, after the game. What does it feel like? Does it feel like an angry room? Does it feel like a just a crushed room, soul-crushed room? What does it feel like?
Yeah, and context here, I wasn't out on the road trip, obviously, so when the losing started, I didn't have a chance to sort of feel it as it compounded. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, they were embarrassed after what happened in the home opener to the Sabres. And already, I think the players are at a complete loss. They do not have answers. And so, it's this cat and mouse game with the media. The questions get asked, and they just don't have answers. If they had answers, I think they would apply them out on the ice. So, frustration without a doubt. And it does sort of feel like it's all boiling in there. And I get it. The media's an easy target. Have been at this for a long time, have seen it countless times, and that's fine. Yeah. Like, if they want to push back and all that kind of, like, whatever, it's fine. I mean, ultimately, they're going to be judged by what they do on the ice, and right now they're not doing enough. But it just feels like there is sort of this toxic energy around the organization from top to bottom, including the very top. And when I say the very top, I mean the roof of Rogers Arena, because clearly there's issues with the roof. The roof is truly caving in on the Vancouver Canucks, according to those photos we saw of the foyer or the concourse last night.
And of course, that happens the one day we get rain, right? As opposed to all the other dry nights here. Go ahead, Blake.
No, I was just going to say that it's not a good look for the team, and it does speak to the blame being spread from top to bottom in this organization. There's really nobody that can hide from this right now. The fact that this administration is now inside of a year still, they're going to still play the card that they were handed this situation and have been unable to do something. But that the situation isn't changing, right, Jeff? I mean, like, the people that are the players that are here are locked in, most of them at long-term contracts. The exit ramp isn't obvious. If it's not a rebuild, if it's not selling out those assets, like we talked about, then what is it? Like, there's not many options here for this team.
Right, and I've seen a lot of people say, like, oh, this management group really hasn't put its stamp on this team, and I would push back a little bit there. They had a decision to make on Brock Boeser. They elected to go 3 years with a significant financial commitment to Brock Boeser when there were howls that maybe it was time to part with Brock Boeser. And I think the organization had sort of compassionate grounds and recognized the personal issues that were behind some of Brock's struggles last year. And they wanted to see him with a free mind come back and hit the ground running. And of course, he's hurt now, hasn't scored a goal this season, and they're paying him to be a goal scorer. But beyond Boeser, they then made a decision of free agency on Ilya Mikheyev when that money could have been spent elsewhere. And, of course, the coup de grace right now is the decision on JT Miller. So they have, as a management group, elected to commit long-term and big money to 3 players without really moving anybody of substance out of the equation here. And so those are decisions. They have done some things that they've just sort of elected to stick with the status quo. And when so many in this market and really around the league, pointed the spotlight on this defense core and said, there's no way you can come back. And here we are. Now, nobody anticipated them being down to their 10th defenseman already 7 games in. Like, that's bad luck. It is. Their defense was going to the depth was going to get tested at some point. You just don't expect it in the first 2 weeks of the season. And so when you have a team like Carolina coming in and just pinning the Canucks in their own zone, that result last night, not unexpected. The final score obviously flattered the Vancouver Canucks, but when you look at the shot clock, 39-16 and 15-3 in the third period, credit to the Hurricanes. And Blake, when you asked me about the mood in the locker room, I thought that was fascinating last night, that 7 games in, and again, I think the players are tired of being asked and trying to come up with answers about their own struggles, and they, to a man, just deflected and sort of heaped praise on the Carolina Hurricanes and said, like, they just didn't allow us, time and space. Like, that's they're such a structured team, and all the plaudits are bang on. Like, the Canes,
good analysis.
Yeah. But I just thought, usually it's sort of that hockey code. You don't want to talk, don't give credit when you lose. It's more about what you didn't do than what the other team did. But not last night. These guys, I think, were just looking for a different line of answers to these same questions. And it really was just to throw some bouquets the way of the Carolina Hurricanes, who, by the way, and again, we don't see them much, and they don't have much of a profile. We know that. But they were a good team last year and didn't get it right in the playoffs, but they're built to win. that defense core, particularly Jacob Slavin, like that guy is just a human offensive eraser. Like, why even bother on his side of the ice? Like, it's where offense goes to die. And with Brent Burns and Pesce and Brady Shea, that's a big four that spends almost no time in its own zone. They go back, they get the puck, quick up, and away they go. And, the ice was just so tilted all night long for the Carolina Hurricanes. And as I said, it in some ways the score flattered the Canucks, but at the end of the night, the better team won. Make no mistake about that.
Let me ask this. If we dismiss, and for the purposes of this exercise, we'll dismiss, that they go streaking, that they play 6:55 hockey or whatever it is they're going to have to play to get back into the playoffs, then the only other way this thing gets salvaged, if you ask me, is if they make some sort of fundamental change about their lineup, about their roster that makes them an improved team. That brings me to Horvat, and that brings me to a Horvat for a defenseman trade. Is that something they have to consider at this moment before it gets too late and before the playoffs are too far away?
Yeah, I certainly think they're on the clock on that one. I also still think that with the redundancy of whether it's Connor Garland or Nils Höglander, and Garland a more accomplished player than Höglander, obviously, but Brock Boeser on the right side, and now you've got Kuzmenko here, who, through the preseason and through 7 games, he scored an opening night. He hasn't scored since, but he had a great chance in the second period last night. Like, he's given the appearance of being able to produce, I think, at the end of the season at the same sort of rate as Garland or Boeser. I still think that the opportunity is there. We discussed earlier in the week, Connor Garland may just not be Bruce Boudreau's guy. And so if you're looking for sort of the first shoe to drop, some people still think that the coach will be changed. I don't think the organization wants to be paying a third head coach here in, parts of 2 seasons. I also think that there's still this element of the fan base that believes in Bruce, although we're not hearing the Bruce there it is chance because there really hasn't been an opportunity in the building for that to happen. So, yeah, the trade route, and then I guess it depends. Like, are you going for the home run? Are you just trying to make the first trade to get people's attention? They've done the healthy scratch thing with Garland. So I think that there are some avenues here. I don't know that it's directly to Bo Horvat, and that's the move that has to be made, but I do think that move has to be on the table. And, again, if committing to all of these same players year over year over year has been sort of the MO for the last bunch of years, how's that working for them? Not very well. Like, at some point, you are going to get to a point where you have to touch this core. And so, I guess the question then is, when is that point and how quickly do they arrive at it? Because, guys, as Andrew and I hosted Rinkwide last night and sort of wade through all of this, and I let Andrew do some math, which is a dangerous thing always, but I can't. Like, I honestly lost sleep. Like, I took it home and I lost sleep last night thinking at 0-5-2, the Canucks have to go 8-10 right now just to get to the record that got Travis Green and Jim Benning fired after 25 games. Like, they're going to have to get on a horse and hustle over the next 18 games to arrive at the same record that saw the largest organizational house cleaning in franchise history.
That's absolutely unbelievable, which leads me to my next question. What happens in these next 2 games? Like, right now, as we speak, guys, are they reaching out to somebody else just in case? Because these back-to-back games at the end of the week and then a 3-day break.
You're talking coach, Blake?
Coach, yes.
Well, no. I think if you're moving that quickly, you're just naming Mike Yeo the interim.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But 3-day break.
What do you think, Jeff?
If you're bringing in a new guy, you announce him on the Saturday, assuming, I think a split's probably not even good enough at this point. On Saturday, and then you got 2 practices before the first game if you were bringing in a new coach.
Well, first things first, I'm really curious about the goaltending decision here. We know that Thatcher Demko, like the team, is still looking for his first win. I thought he was really good in the first period last night. Stopped 14 of 15. The only one was the Svechnikov laser on the power play. And I thought, okay, that's the kind of goaltending that they need. And then he makes the stop on Jarvis in the first minute of the third, and the puck just, it's lying loose in the blue paint. I thought it was a decent night for Demko, but again, in crunch time, he's not delivering victories. Now with back-to-backs, Pittsburgh's obviously the showcase of the two. And so hockey conventional wisdom is your backup generally gets the second of the back-to-backs. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if they go to Spencer Martin in Seattle, give Demko just a little bit more rest here, chance to work with Ian Clark, and bring him back against the Penguins, whatever. I mean, they need goaltending. They need help in front of all of those positions. But if they don't get a victory, then, as you said, there's this time that maybe would be the right time for change. I wonder. I think, Matt, you're probably right that Mike Yeo just steps in. He's got head coaching experience a couple times over. But I also know that Patrick Allvin is a huge fan of Jeremy Colleton. And I do wonder if the next true head coach of the Vancouver Canucks is in waiting down on the farm. Now, that's remarkably early for all of that to happen, but they discussed with Colleton various roles, and I think they looked at jobs on the NHL bench and elected that he still wants to be a head coach, and he's so young by hockey standards, he's probably going to get another opportunity to run his own bench in the National Hockey League. And so I do wonder if that was sort of the idea. You go down to Abbotsford, do a good job down there, develop some players, and essentially we're grooming you for when the time is right. But who in their right mind would have thought that the time was right before the end of October? So, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but I do think that all these things are on the table and have to be on the table and open for discussion.
Marvelous stuff, Jeff. What do you and Andrew have coming up on Rinkwide?
Well, we'll just continue to try to figure out how they dig themselves out of this. And there are no easy solutions. Again, if they had them, I think they would have done this. Bruce, for all that we know of him being this jovial character, boy, you can just feel it in his media availabilities right now. He seems like he's at a loss too, but the buck stops with him. He's the head coach. He and his coaching staff, they got to figure it out. Not surprised that they gave them a day off with back-to-backs coming up here, and I think just get away sort of from each other and all of it, and come back for a practice on Wednesday before heading down to Seattle. And look, the Kraken, that's a winnable game. I know the Kraken look improved over last year, but they're a second-year team that still has its struggles. And so that's a very winnable game for the Vancouver Canucks, but easy for me to say. They got to get out there and get it done.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's see one before we call any game winnable for these Canucks at 0-5-2, as Jeff informs. 3 losses away from the franchise record of 0-8-2. Thanks for this, Jeff. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Blake, just the one thing I'll say, and I appreciate what Jeff had to say about looking at moving Connor Garland, Nils Höglander. I don't think those guys are getting you top 4 defensemen.
No.
And I think that's what you need. And so that brings me back to Horvat.
Yeah.
Maybe you find somebody who really, really likes Connor Garland and you're able to get a sort of a fringy top 4 defenseman for him. Okay. But Höglander, forget it. I mean, I think Höglander equates to a third pair defenseman, and they've got some of those.
Does Höglander and Jack Rathbone get you a top 4 defenseman? Are you willing to go down that road?
I think we're getting into the area there of overvaluing our players because we see them and know more about them. I'm not sure what Jack Rathbone is worth on an open NHL market until he proves he's an NHL defenseman. And if he does prove he's an NHL defenseman, God, they ought to keep him because they need a lot of those. So I'm not even sure Boeser right now gets you a top 4 defenseman, Blake, because the contract is onerous, as Jeff says. So I think you're basically a Horvat trade or bust here, unless you're willing to go at Paterson, Hughes, or Demko in terms of getting a fix to this defense. And, even then, I'm not sure it's going to be anytime soon. I think you're probably 3 to 4 weeks away when NHL teams typically take that U.S. Thanksgiving holiday to have a good, hard self-assessment and a self-scout of themselves. So there are no easy answers, as Jeff says.